this afternoon. I think morning to Paul and morning to King and also some of the delegates in Europe and also in Africa. Okay, so the webinar today is the live webinar, right? So we are talking about the importance of the EA skills, right? You can call it, business architect, information architect, software architect, infrastructure architect, technology architect, solution architect, but it's just encompassing that all the architects need to be connected within the enterprise. Yeah, and of course nowadays, because of I think in the last 2 years we have gone through COVID so-called situation. I think the digital world is become like it's a mandatory, no longer optional, and it's the necessity, right? So everybody now time now is like we are start going back to work, so we need to so-called do a proper job, right? In the last 2 years we can do a shortcut or quick fix, but now we need to do it right. We need to do it permanently, so that many years to come we are able to live within our so-called digital enterprise. Okay, so let me just briefly introduce our enterprise architecture chapters, because we are here. I'm representing Singapore Computer Society, right? I'm the president of the SCS EA chapters. So actually our objective is, today I think it's like we formed this chapters about 5 years ago, right? So at the time we are also trying to accelerate the EA adoption as part of the digital culture. I think with the COVID, I think now we can see that the demand is there. The people start realizing that there must be someone need to do the architecture. We cannot use to the way we used to do like in the past. We just execute any digital project, but now we need someone to coordinate, right? Because without the coordination, I think you know what happened, right? Without planning, there'll be many overlapping, there'll be many duplication, and at the end, someone after us may need to fix what we have created the mess today, right? And fixing the digital world, I think, is maybe 100 times more harder than fixing in the past, like stovepipe or silo application. Now it's called island of digital, right? It's very, very complex. So we need to fix that. And of course, before we fix, I think those of us, I think who understand the importance of the architecture, we need to apply the architecture correctly, right? Because so that the next generation to come, that we enjoy our work, right? That we appreciate what we are doing today. And of course, we also want to share our best practices. That's why the session like this, right? We have the so-called knowledge sharing. The first part, later Paul will be introducing the latest BTABoK, Business Technology Architecture Body of Knowledge. So that one is a so-called a proven collection of the best practices, the skill that work, right? The method that work. So Paul will be sharing that, right? And then of course we also will hear the other part is that we're going to do a panel, right? We want to have more insight sharing about the practice in Africa, in Europe, as well as if you have any question, please feel free or get ready with your just click the link at the bottom there, right? The chat or the you can just ask the question, and I will facilitate the question during our panel session, right? And of course, we want to align with the IMDA mission, right? We want to increase the EA talent. I think the EA talent has been topics since I remember we discussed with Paul like 15 years ago, like how do you hire architects, right? So this is very, very challenging. Can I just promote the guy that working the longest in my organization? Someone that worked 30 years, right? Like the same age with maybe my great-grandparent, right? Give him the title of architects, right? Because he worked the longest in this organization and he knows everything, right? Can we do that? The answer is we can't, right? So how do we so-called increase the talent? Of course, now it's like in the fast pace like Singapore, right? What should we do? Just import. That's the fastest way, right? Because we cannot wait someone to born the baby and then wait until finish university 20 years old. We can't wait. I need it next month. I need it next week, right? So we need to make sure that now whatever talent that we have can be trained, right? Can be transformed, can be reskilled to become one of the architects, right? To be business architect, data architect, software architect, infrastructure architect, or solution architect. Okay. So that's I think the objective of our EA chapters. And just give you a glance, so these are our committee, newly established and re-elected as of last week, right? For the period of this year until next year. Okay, so we have the flavor from the faculty, from the government link, from the vendor, from the government, and yeah. So I think some of them also are present today in our webinar. Okay. Just want to announce that we are continuing our second year of EA Awards, right? So I think last year some of you have attended and participated in the EA Awards, so it's now coming again, and we'll start the nomination next month in April. Okay, so for those of you who have done the architecture, we need to be recognized, right? Because sometimes the architect is that nobody knows we are doing a good job, right? It's the time for us now, at least we take some credit, okay? We don't want that every other sales team or marketing team take the credit. We also need to take the credit, right? So this is where the avenue for us to get recognition in the industry. Okay, so it's open for all company that has registered in Singapore, and of course implementation can be outside Singapore, so no issue, right? So this will be coming on the second years. Okay, right. So I just give you a rundown before I hand over to Paul. Right, basically some of you heard about the concept of the digital EA. What's the difference between enterprise architecture that we used to talk about and the digital enterprise architecture? I think there are a few key differences, right? Because in the traditional way, the architecture is pretty much in the PowerPoint, in the Excel, in the Word, in the SharePoint, but now it's moving towards digital. That is more so-called responsive, and we can query, we can interact, we can ask the architecture in terms of, can I modify this? What's the impact, right? It's the same thing like the building construction. If I demolish one pillar, would that affect the entire structure of my building, right? Can I replace the window, and etc.? So the same thing now, the EA has evolved towards a more responsive, a more digital way, right? So actually the term was popularized somewhere in the 2013, okay? So you can see the Gartner chart here, that actually the architecture adoption also was very so-called going through a trauma, right? From the peak at the year 2000 until 2012. 2012 was in the so-called in the slum, right? Until the Gartner pushing the concept of the EA, and then using the so-called digital platform, etc. So now the take-up rate is getting stronger, right? So I think this is just the highlight on the sum of the Gartner predict, right? This is actually the Gartner predict in the 2020. That Gartner mentioned that the architecture helped the organization to become intelligent, right? Intelligent means as it is connected in the digital, right? You can get the response fast, you can ask the architecture itself, and you can query, and they can have feedback for you to make a decision, right? So if you have set up architecture correctly, your EA team enable your organization to become intelligent. And in 2021, right? So Gartner basically predict is that EA design the composable organization. Okay, so composable mean I can slice and dice the organization, right? Which is what actually already taken place during COVID. Even though it's a quick fix, but moving forward, I think we need to make it permanent, so that we can composable organization by various teams, slice and dice. And of course, in the 2022, this year, so Gartner predict is that EA enable the evolution of democratized digital organization. So what does it mean is that every business unit, every so-called function, right, they can make the authoritative decision, and they can see straight away what is the impact to the rest of the organization, right? So basically is that when you want to make something drastic, you know what will happen, right? We don't do a drastic change typically in the large organization. We do incremental change, right? So with that, I think just a background on the digital EA for me to kick off this webinar. So we hand over the rest of the time to Paul. Not rest of the time. I think about 45 minutes to Paul. Then after that, we go into the panel session. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you to the SES for hosting this webinar. It's always good to get to come and talk. I can't wait till we get back to the point where we can come and talk and meet in person. But yeah, thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to King's presentations as well, and as talking to the audience in a more open way about EA and architecture and what it means. Now I'm just going to get my screen sharing on here. Let's see. And there we go. Now, at IASA So for those of you that don't know what IASA is an international association, a nonprofit for architects of all types. So we have infrastructure architects, information architects, EAs, solution architects, software architects, cloud architects. If it's got the word architect in it, we probably have a member that's that way. And we're about 20 years old. We've been doing this for a long time. Aaron and I think have been doing it for almost 17 now, or as well, of that 20 years. So we've seen really EA and architecture emerge as a emerge into the boardroom, as opposed to where it started, which was really the server room, right? So 60 years ago, 50 years ago, a guy named Edward Dijkstra started talking about this architecture stuff. But when he was talking about architecture, he was really talking about the structure of a software system. Flash forward to 2022, and architecture is one of the top jobs in all of out of all jobs, really. It constantly gets Forbes does surveys and constantly gets the top job kind of status around the world. And we have to ask ourselves why and what it takes to make one. So in this talk, we're going to talk about really what does the Bitterbug do and what's new about it. What's not new? So there's a lot of the Bitterbug that isn't new. So we know a lot of what it takes to be an architect, and we really haven't changed that much over the last 20 to 30 years. There's some debates that rage about architecture that have yet to really ever get any satisfactory answer at an industry level. But mostly speaking, we know what architects do, we know how they do it, and we know how they succeed at it in a mature way. The Bitterbug is a radical new kind of framework for developing an architecture practice. Now, notice that we say, an architecture practice. Well, that we mean that in the same way that you would see a legal practice or a medical practice. So we've gotten away from this notion of doing architecture as a project, as Aaron had said. We've gotten away from this notion of doing architecture, with non-architects. To a degree, I mean, it is a team sport, but again, it's like, you wouldn't have a medical practice made up of plumbers, right? It's a practice is made up of professionals. So we've gotten this notion of a practice, and we're going to talk about this practice model through this presentation. So kind of what is this architecture stuff anyway, and what is the objectives? Why did we build it? So we get really tired. I'm sure all of you are tired of kind of the LinkedIn debates about what is architecture, etc. And we wanted to create something that actually got people aligned with outcomes, as opposed to arguing about definitions, and get a common language of architecture and of visual taxonomy, if you will, to understand how these elements and concepts relate. So our number one objective is to increase the quality of digital outcomes and products by getting rid of this confusion in architecture practices. Now, some may argue that TOGAF has done that, or MODAF has done that, or FIAF has done that, or there's a dozen architecture frameworks on the market, and then there's a dozen that aren't architecture frameworks that talk about architecture, things like ITIL and things like the Scaled Agile framework, for example, or Disciplined Agile from the PMI. The point is we wanted to get rid of that confusion so that we can get architects doing things to create digital value, digital advantage, as IASA calls it, instead of talking about what is architecture. We wanted to be able to increase these outcomes and decrease the cost overall of running an architecture practice, as well as decrease the time to deliver value. So no more long 3-year EA projects top down trying to document everything that's in a company, which like Aaron said, is it's obsolete the day you're done, and it's obsolete the day you start. So what we've done is really turn that notion on its head. and focus on an actual managed set of objectives that help to reduce the cost of hiring, reduce the cost of education, and reduce all of this confusion. Now, one of the things that we learned, we looked at was how are other practices organized. And we looked specifically at doctors and lawyers and building architects and things like that. And what we found is that even the top people of the trade, of the field, continue to practice. So we always say, you know, the chief of medicine still sees patients. And if he or she doesn't, then they're no longer a doctor, right? They don't get to have that job and not see patients. So what does that mean for architects? How do we avoid rising too high? To a degree, what does it mean to sort of go so high up that you become management of architects instead of practitioners? So how do we look at that? How do we think about road mapping and governance and training and focus areas? So there's a very, you know, what does it mean to be a cloud architect or a security architect? And is that the same as a software architect or a solution architect or an infrastructure architect, et cetera? So we really had to dig deep to understand these competencies. And then we wanted to be very clear that, you know, in a hospital, the management of a hospital is actually not done by doctors, it's done by hospital administrators. So it's an interesting relationship in a practice. Career paths. What is the career path of an architect, and how can we make that more rigorous? How can we make that more meaning? How do we make it something that's repeatable? The strong relationships with industry between vendors, education, and things like that. We're still lacking a unified education and career path, because really every company right now still does architecture a little different. And it would be very much like if every bank had their own currency. It would be very confusing whether you went to one bank or another if each one of them carried their own currency. Or even more importantly, if they defined what an account was differently. So this whole notion of kind of standardizing on what the practice means or what a practice is, and then how do we try out new ideas? Do road mapping really work? You know, and if so, what kinds of roadmaps? Do product roadmaps work? How do those link to milestone deliverables and capabilities and business objectives? You know, what is this whole agility, and how do we adopt it? So all of this kind of regular experimentation and gathering that information and putting it into a public body of knowledge that anybody can participate in. So keep in mind, you know, there are not a lot of secrets in architecture, and it really takes a body of knowledge that anyone can participate in to really get there. Now, when we look at the numbers of architects in the world, it's really kind of interesting. Now, this is not exact, but from the data that we have from surveys, it is relatively close. What's interesting about the world is we have a lot of architects, but the vast majority of them are actually software architects of some kind. Now, you'll note there's only 5 bubbles here. We don't have security in there, integration, cloud. There's AI architects, etc. But notice how the vast majority of architects are actually software solution architects. The next largest are information and infrastructure architects. So notice that the vast majority of our field is actually people that wouldn't consider themselves enterprise architects, right? Just by the numbers. Now, enterprise architects do make up a very a large bubble, as well as business architects. But notice how much smaller they are. Now, there's this debate going on, and you may have heard of Chris Potts, the author of Fruition, and Wendy Keene, the lead of the Business Architecture Guild, and some of these other kind of thought leaders. We're actually doing a podcast series right now on debating, again, does this model actually look like the right-hand side? Right? Is an architecture practice, an enterprise architecture practice, is it really made up of these 4 specializations? And should there be really titled EAs? And if so, what do they do in relation to these other specializations? So, because again, it gets really confusing if you're a software architect and somebody says, well, I'm here to architect the enterprise. You may or may not be very familiar with that notion. What they're really saying in the digital world is that technology has emerged from the back end of companies, from below companies, in the kind of underneath underneath the company's operations and sales. What we know as technology as enablement, it has emerged to, as you know, a first order object. It is we use technology to make money. We use technology to save money. We use technology to modify our customers or to provide value to our customers. And that emergence has made for this need for experts in how to do that. Now, architects have long been experts in structure and function and form, and we're going to talk about all of that. But the organizations of the world really need experts in how to make technology a profit center, a fundamental business practice. And we've struggled with how to do that. But the inspirational, the aspirational CIOs and CTOs of the world have learned that hiring architects to do this actually works, right? So one of our learnings over the last 20 years is digital initiatives that don't have good architects tend to fail, especially in a fast-paced, moving world. So we have to have architects at the bottom, not just at the top, right? Because delivery happens at the mid tiers and the bottom of the organization. I don't want to say it's the bottom of the organization, but right, the CIO can't be on every project. So we ask ourselves, what would a CIO, CTO, a good one, do if they could? And that very much maps to what architects do, right? They think strategically. They work with stakeholders. They understand value, right? They understand the depth of the technology and the breadth of the technology, but they also understand how that links to customer behavior. There are specialized architects, as we've seen, and communities of practice, meaning having an architecture practice is more important than having a good architecture, because there really is no such thing as being done, in the sense that there's really no such thing as we have a good architecture, so we're done. It is we have good architects using an architecture to help us make investment decisions on technology, and to deliver those things regularly. Now, scope is the devil in all things, right? Scope, I like to say scope is really the thing that gives architects the hardest problem. It is when we go up too high, like Icarus, we burn our wings and we start to fall. It's very hard to show value if you are reporting at the executive level, but don't have architects at the project product solution level. And the reason is obviously you become a scarce resource. You become not available to go. So what we did was we invented the Bitterbug. Now, what is the Bitterbug? Well, it looks like this sort of confusing mass of icons, but there is some method to our madness here. The BTABoK is at its core a set of descriptive articles about best practices in each of these iconic icons and in each of these articles, right? And in each of these concepts. Now, we're going to talk about what that means, but I just want to show you the page where the BTABoK is. So notice this is all open source. We will be checking it into GitHub soon, so anybody can download it and modify it and submit a change. Ultimately, though, you can see that each of these articles is linked. You can go click on them. The most recent one that we published was engagement, for example, for customer engagement. And you can see that it has a whole article and a set of tools, and we'll dive into that in just a second. But there's really a method to this madness here. It's not just descriptive articles. What this does is it aligns an architecture practice to a set of outcomes, and we call that IBAM. Now, IBAM means imagine, become, achieve, and maximize, right? So in each of these quadrant areas, we have a set of outcomes that a business would like to achieve. Now, all business people care about these outcomes. We're not saying that these are owned by architects. However, technology impacts them quite distinctly. So in the imagine area, we are imagining a digital customer or a digital beneficiary. So if you work for a government agency or a nonprofit or something like that, what we're doing is imagining the beneficiary of the business value that we're creating, right? So if I'm if I go pick up a coffee cup from Starbucks, a cup of coffee from Starbucks, I am their customer. The fact that I ordered it on an app means that I am a digital customer. Also, technology has an impact on all of my behavior, the ecosystem of customers and partners, etc., as well as I have an entire journey with you. Now, maybe Starbucks isn't the right answer. Maybe we'll want to think about, you know, getting a wireless set up in your home, right? Or getting a telephone set up, or, you know, that kind of thing. So you go to a company and you have an entire journey with them. And some portions of that are digital and some portions of that are analog. But we learned with COVID, as Aaron said, that we have to be digital in all engagements with customers. So we really have to struggle to imagine what a digital customer does. Now, this is where architects really show their strength, is in these outcomes and helping to influence those outcomes. Now, we also want to become a digital business. Once we know who our digital customer is, we need to think about a digital business model. And that's been made famous through things like the business model canvas, business capabilities, agility, and strategy, right? These outcomes in this digital business model are different than they were 20 or even 20 years ago when we started IASA. Back then, when I would say things on the stage about, you know, airplanes falling out of the sky because of software, or, you know, that customers are going to be, you know, ordering all their food online for, you know, from the grocery store instead of going, or people kind of said, yeah, you know, IT is really to enable real business. And Aaron and I both have been saying for 20 years, IT is the business. Technology is the business, more like, is what it is. So imagining a digital business model and becoming a digital business and imagining that digital customer are achievements that we as architects are dedicated to. Now, add to that, what we really learned in COVID was, what do we do with a digital employee? How do we get employees to achieve digital outcomes when they may or may not be familiar with technology at any deep level? But effectively, that our workforce is shifting towards a more digitally enabled workforce, to more, you know, a gig kind of economy work, where we're using platforms like Upwork or other tools to do consultative work. But in this employee set, we have to have the employees understand what digital means to the company. So achieving the digital employee is our third objective. Now, our fourth objective is what we traditionally in IT have been good at, or have been working towards, and that is maximizing digital operations. Now, digital operations being the production and deployment of technology of any type throughout the company. Now, we're seeing that stretch significantly further and further in terms of its definition. The advent of operational technology, or I shouldn't say the advent, the high investment in operational technology, the penetration of technology in our day in and day out lives. I mean, this platform is a great example, right? I'm sitting in my living room or kitchen in Amsterdam, but I'm speaking to you in Singapore. Now, it's always been possible to do webcasts, but basically the blending of technology in all aspects of life has made our job at maximizing digital operations actually that much more complicated, right? Is our product available on the Alexa app? How do we integrate with our partners' ecosystems? How do we maintain velocity at very high speeds but still provide for safety and liability. And then automation is another major target there. So notice that in this outcome model, in this outcome ring, that we've really seen the things that people are passionate about. And in each of these, you have, you know, an article, you have a description of what to do, you have a set of tools to use. We'll go down into the middle circles here for a second. Now, this is how you run an architecture practice. So unlike TOGAF is a framework which is prescriptive, and it tells you, do this document, do this thing. What it doesn't say, for example, TOGAF doesn't say anything about customers. It doesn't even have a concept of a customer in it. There's articles written on top of TOGAF, how to use TOGAF, but what it is supposed to be, how do you make an architecture practice work? Well, the problem is, though, it doesn't really tell you what's good about a roadmap, for example. So it says, do a roadmap, and here's a template. It doesn't tell you what makes a good roadmap and how that roadmap connects conceptually to things like investment prioritization and planning and business cases, to things like agility, or things like design patterns, or things like coverage or quality attributes or other deliverables, right? So the missing element, if you will, in the industry was really that each of these concepts is actually connected to these other concepts, right? So if I do, for example, experimentation as a part of my practice, we talk a lot about continuous experimentation as the natural progression after continuous delivery. And what that means is you start experimenting with your sites and your customer facing activity a lot more after you get done a continuous delivery exercise. Products, what does it mean to be more product focused as opposed to project focused? Governance, how do we participate? How do we lead? How do we provide governance, etc., as well as things like value streams or principles, what we often call standards. So each of these articles then is interconnected to a set of other articles. For example, risk and cost and benefit are deeply connected concepts, but none of the existing frameworks in the marketplace gave you enough information about how to do these things. So every company did it differently. And what we're trying to do is get rid of we're trying to move to the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of doing roadmaps is the same for every company. So why does every company do roadmaps differently? We don't know. They've been able to. So what we're going to do is, what we've done then is to bring this all together in an engagement model. And an engagement model is basically the efforts and the structure of an architecture practice and team, right? So an engagement model means if I take, let's say, 20 architects, what do they do? Right? Okay, some of them are EAs, some of them are solution architects, some of them are infrastructure cloud architects. What is their day in and day out work? And if you think about these icons, the operating model, the value model, the people model, this covers almost all of that work, right? There's deliverables, there's roadmaps, there's architectural analysis, there's views and viewpoints, there's stakeholder management and design and patterns and decisions. Services, capabilities, all of those things are there. So what we've done is we've taken the mystery out of doing architecture work in the BTABoK, and we've turned it into an open source body of knowledge and best practices and techniques and tools. So you can use the icons, the areas of the BTABoK to guide your practice to create what we call digital advantage. Now, digital advantage means what we always thought, what we've always talked about, which is effectively, it means turning technology into a profit center. Now, what does that translate to? It means that we have a noticeable and understood impact on what our customers buy from us, how much of it they buy, and where and how it's delivered to them. So how we create value as architects is digital advantage. Now, that might be things like applying AI to a sales process or an operations process. That might be building out the technology to integrate Alexa into our purchasing process, into our customers' purchasing behaviors. It is the application of technology to modern business problems in a way that technology is at the forefront of the solution. Innovation means that we are able to capture ideas. So this whole architect-driven digital advantage means that we get very good, and we have to get very, very good at capturing ideas and innovation, understanding innovation in the marketplace, understanding innovation inside of our own organization, and being able to connect those with products and programs that actually deliver on that innovation in a way that's financially viable. Or again, if you're with a government agency, minimizing cost is important, but again, maximizing the value to our customer or beneficiary. How do we invest in programs, right? So for example, are we prepared to invest in 5G? Are we prepared to invest in operational technology, in remote process automation, in AI, in cloud? What do we invest in as a company, and how do we rationalize those investments? Now, we've found without architects, that tends to be a pretty analog process, meaning we don't see good business cases for technology. We often see other priorities. Technology is treated as kind of that's for those IT people. But when you get architecture in there, what happens is technology becomes just another investment, just like marketing and sales and things of that nature. We also then look at managing constant change. Now, capability transition basically means change management. That means that we get over this notion as we start looking at whole enterprises and we start getting an entire architecture practice working, we start realizing that change is never going away. And uncertainty and complexity are never going away. And in fact, the more we grow, the more change, complexity, and uncertainty we get. So we have an expression that architects don't ever get certainty, they just get better at dealing with uncertainty. And that's part of growing in the competencies and the skills. But that capability change is constant, and we need to be able to target it at value creation. And this value management piece is one of the key missing elements of most architecture practices today. The ability to be involved in these four upfront cycles and activities is actually what ends up pushing architects or IT into the back of the house. And so what we have to do is get trained and capable of dealing with these innovation, investment, capability changes, and value management before we focus on the operational excellence, or we end up being just keep the lights on, right? Just maintenance focused. So, or development focused, or what's traditionally known as the IT architect, which is actually a misnomer, but it basically boils down to the people that are a little too technical and don't understand business concepts. Now, by doing that, we create a need for a real architect. Now, IASA doesn't care about titles. I don't care if you have the title architect. That doesn't make you an architect. I can call myself a doctor. That just makes me dangerous, right? If you come to my house and I tell you, hey, you know what I can do? You know, that really expensive medical operation you were going to get, I can do it super cheap for you. There's a reason why I can do it super cheap, because I'm probably going to kill you. But I'm not trained. I don't have the competencies, no matter what I call myself. So what we've done is say, we need to take the concept of title out, and we need to ask questions about skills. What skills do you have? So for a long time, IASA has been kind of the industry standard for the competencies of an architect. Aaron used to say, if IASA is how you make a chef, in TOGAF's how you set up a kitchen. And I always thought that was good. But we've kind of grown from there. So now we're the kitchen and the chef and all of those things too. And we hope that you'll become a part of the contributing list, because again, it's your body of knowledge. It's completely open source. It can be changed by anybody. It has to be approved, obviously, but The point is that this body of knowledge has shown us that we have 5 major competency areas. And if you have these 5, it does not matter what your title is, you are an architect. Now, those 5 are really critical, and you'll see very quickly how they link in with the concepts in the BTABoK. Each one of these is a pillar of what we do as architects. So, for example, we have the business technology strategy pillar, which is how you run a business, how you think about investment prioritization and planning, how do you think about value management and some of those things. So if we were to go back to this image, you'd see very quickly that business technology strategy skills are used to do things like value streams, business capabilities, business strategy, risk methods, value methods. You know, all of these things are very, very involved in that business technology competency level. So if you're missing that, then you're not an architect. Again, I talk to a lot of programmers who talk about they just did this wonderful architecture for the thing, and I say for you know, this thing or that thing, and it's you know, it's continuously delivered on microservices with a configuration management, and it's zero trust, and it's wonderful. And I say, okay, why did you build it, and how much did it cost, and how much is it making you? And they like look at me and go, well, I don't know, why would that be important? And I say, okay, well, you didn't do an architecture, you did a design, and it's perfectly fine design. It's a technical design, and that's great. But an architecture is about the why. And the business technology strategy skills give us the why of our decisions. They're also unbelievably important in decision-making, even at the most technical levels. IT environment is what you would imagine it is. It is the set of skills and competencies that go with having worked in a technology group, right? App development, infrastructure, data, quality assurance, all of those kinds of things. Quality attributes are the cross-cutting concerns, right? The security, the reliability, the performance, the usability of things. And then human dynamics are, of course, what it takes to work in a complex stakeholder ecosystem. But, you know, the hardest part of change is people. And architects spend a lot of time practicing people skills. Now, again, I want to point out to my business architect friends and my enterprise architect friends that if you're lacking in quality attributes or IT environment, you're not an architect either. Right? You have to have all 5 to be an architect. If you don't, now you don't have an equal ratio between architects, but ultimately, if you don't have the 5 and you're missing one, then that's where the problems have come from. It isn't what we title architects, it's what competencies they have that make them powerful on top, make them good at this digital advantage. Now notice that we actually put the specializations on top of this, which is exactly what you would get if you became a doctor, right? First you go to medical school, then you specialize, and then you learn your specialization, and then you get better at your specialization. But you're first a doctor. So that's what the 5 pillars represent: design, human dynamics, quality attributes, IT environment, and BTS. At some point in your career, you reach a significant degree of seniority, and you may be able to call yourself a chief architect, where you are actually the head of a portion of the practice or a head of an entire architecture practice. And we actually have an entire chief architect forum for Fortune 500 chief architects, as well as we're starting a new chief architect forum for smaller practices. And we ask these questions all the time, you know, how many architects do you have? What do they do, et cetera? There are all these life cycles that we have to be involved in. And that includes things like, you know, innovation, strategy, planning, transformation, utilization, and measurement. Now, it's interesting that these things are also continuous, and that architects' participation in those life cycles happens at different scopes. So, for example, the enterprise may have a big life cycle that's called the budgeting cycle. That's change. But then there may be smaller life cycles that we participate in, things like iterative development, or you know, a marketing initiative, or customer changes. Also, we have to be very understand that different architects and different roles create what we call healthy tension. Having architects doesn't mean that you solve all the problems and we do all of the everything, right? That we make all the decisions and that we're in charge. That's not what it means. What it does is it creates an environment where architects penetrate, excuse me, an environment where architects penetrate the entire enterprise, and we stimulate this digital innovation ideas, right? So I may have chief architects, but I also have solution architects. They should, roughly speaking, have the same competencies and be saying the same things. But because I have solution architects, it means I can spread them out much broader throughout my enterprise and create this ongoing dialogue. We pair those with things like business architects to help manage entire value streams. So you see business architects delivering on value streams, solution architects delivering on solutions within value streams, and then you have specialists, these other people, software, infra, cloud, whatever, that work as expert architects in key areas. Our version in the BTABoK of the enterprise architect is really the chief architect. We prefer, we describe enterprise and chief architect as the same basic structure, which is you're still delivering in your specialization. You're still a part of delivery of architecture. You're still doing architecture, but you're doing it within your, as a senior person in your field. So we would see things like the chief of software architecture or the chief business architect. We see principal software business architect happening as well. So we've avoided, I mean, you can interchange enterprise architect with that if you want, but we try to avoid the big arguments in the BTABoK. And one of them is, how do software and enterprise architects work together effectively? So we've worked all of that out by creating a much more realistic set of jobs. Now there's another aspect of this, and that is effectively, what about engineering? Are architects, how engineering should architects be? The answer to that is effectively the same as it is in building architecture, right? The same as it is in medicine. You're not a, just because you've been a nurse for 20 years doesn't mean you can be a doctor in 2 days, right? You have, it's a different role. And this creates actually healthy outcomes. Now, one of the really big thing, and the last thing I'll talk about today, is the BTABoK is a set of concept tools. So notice here we've got a thing called the structured customer approach, which uses our structured canvases. Notice that you see things like business models, customer journeys, personas, jobs to be done, stakeholder analysis, service blueprints, market analysis. And these are very lightweight, easy to understand canvases that you can actually download as a part of the BTABoK. And you'll see that these canvases all connect to each other. So I can work out service blueprints easily from a set of customer journeys. I can work out personas from a business model canvas. I can work out jobs to be done forces from market analysis. So again, these concepts and these canvases are facilitation tools to help you think and discuss with your stakeholders the appropriate decisions for technology and your company. We can then assess your maturity at architecture very easily as a practice now in 2 ways. I can measure your competencies as a team, and I can measure your maturity in each of these operating value, people, and architect practice models. These measurements will tell us, correlate reasonably well to outcomes in the outcome model. So the more mature practices that you have in experimentation, road mapping, value streams, benefits realization, repository management, legacy modernization, etc., the more successful you'll be in driving and imagining your digital customer engagement or your digital business strategy. So the outcome model actually is positively impacted by the maturity of what you do in each of these nodes. So in that way, it's kind of a map also, right? You can't get from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore without a map, or you might bump into it on accident, but it's much better to have a map of the world. So that's what makes this a descriptive body of knowledge for enterprise and chief architects, etc. These maturity the rankings then can be focused on the internal or external facing zones. You notice that you just see the same icons here: ecosystem, engagement, customer journey, strategy. All of those that are the digital outcomes from the previous stage. So we do these assessments of organizations, show them where they're at in their maturity, and then give them a working plan to increase that maturity. So that is it. That was my presentation.
All right. Let's now move on into our third session. Basically, it's about the Q&A and also panel session. So I have prepared a list of questionnaire for our two esteemed panelists. Please feel free to ask a question. Right? Any question, of course, related to digital transformation, to customer journey transformation, to enterprise architecture, to architect role, and to the project success, and etc. Right? So there's a Q&A there, and I would encourage all of you to type in whatever a burning question that you want to ask. Right? Because I think today we have a perspective from Paul, I think representing Europe and America, US. He lived there for many years, I think, and he interacted a lot with all the architect enterprises and also all the governmental bodies about the architecture. So I think we can get a fair perspective, and of course, seldom to be heard in our region from Africa, right? So King section later, we also be sharing about the development of enterprise architecture in the Africa continent, right? That I would also love to hear, because normally I only hear, the sharing from Hong Kong, from Australia, from, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, India, etc. But I seldom hear anything, the progress from Africa, because I don't know, maybe it's too far away, right? It's very far, right? So, I mean, if without the COVID, maybe I also want to go to Africa, right? To take a look at the country, right? They say it's a beautiful day. So, all right. So I think without further ado, again, please click the Q&A and you type in there, and then I will pick up your question accordingly, right? So I think let's roll this panel session by maybe let me start with since Paul just spoken, so I think he may take a rest for a few seconds, Paul, not few minutes, few seconds. Okay, maybe I ask King section. All right, King section, you want to unmute your mic? Okay. Perhaps can you share briefly your background or experience in performing the role of enterprise architecture, right? I know you're working from a global bank, right? So how did you become an architect today? Is it because your boss find that you are the most, just now, just jokingly, right? The most senior guy working the longest time, and no other person. So, okay, King section, yours. Okay, you become the architect, you lead the bank again. So perhaps you want to share with us the truth, right? Okay, over to your King section.
Well, Elon, thank you very much. And then I think that was also a fantastic presentation from Paul as well. So how did I become an architect? I think it's a mixture of all the things Paul said and all the things you are saying. Now, obviously, my background is played around technology for a while. I have been on the technology scene for. So I was saying my career actually began as a consultant for technology. So I started by working servers and working systems for some organizations way back, and I veered off into some software development as a consultant for a while. Then I also went ahead and did some work for some software development house, which was in the UK, but I also had offices down in Africa. And then eventually I moved on to work for the biggest telco in Ghana, which is also a multinational that has a presence everywhere in Africa. That's MTN. And then stayed in MTN for a while, and then moved on to do some work for Fidelity Bank, and that's where I've been for almost 10 years. So how did I become an architect? Well, it started off with the conversation. Okay, this guy has been here for a while and he knows the environment pretty well. Now, what skills does he come to the table with? Okay, so I am a Cisco certified network engineer. I am also certified in most of the cybersecurity certifications. And in Fidelity Bank, my initial role was to be an IT security manager, which then moved on, being pushed by the regulator to take up more security responsibilities for the banks. And that moved me to a cyber and information security head. And then till last year, recently, where my architecture journey actually started. So in short, that's how I got into the role.
All right, thank you so very much. I think you can see that, I don't know whether by chance or by coincidence, but there were a path, right? Path that someone to become architects. So work as a consultant, work as the security expert, work as a developer, work as the infra, and etc. So that is a typical pattern, right? That we all hear that how do you today land to perform the architect role? So basically they got a substantive background, relevant background to qualify you to perform the job, right? And from there, of course, we need to deliver value of the business to the technology. Right, so they have a Q&A box there. Please click and type in your question. Now, I think over to you, Paul. Okay, so how about yourself? What is your background and how you become an architect? Are you born as a baby architect or what?
I was born as a baby. Yeah, there was a big A on my forehead when I was born. So, and oddly enough, it's kind of funny you say that, but we're starting to see the emergence of sort of second and third generation architects. We have a program we work with universities on architecture awards, and a number of the program winners, they win big money and grants and things for their schooling. But a number of the winners have been like, well, my dad was an architect or my mom was an architect, and so I'm becoming an architect, which I think is a really cool thing. I have never ever, I got a degree in Japanese. So I got fascinated with technology. I mean, I was always fascinated with technology from like games and things like that as a kid, but I wasn't one of those sort of, I taught myself to program on a Commodore, kind of kids. I was much more a culture nerd. So I have a degree in Japanese and Eastern religions of all things. But I got fascinated with technology, and I taught myself to program, got a job as a coder, and then translated that into a job as a development manager in Dell Japan. So I moved to Japan with my then a new wife, and I did a major project. Basically, what happened was I redid the Dell store, the online store. Almost got fired because I wasn't that good a technologist. In some ways, I made some stupid mistakes in production. But what happened is we did a couple of my ideas got put into the store. And then a number of the designs that we used allowed us to do things that you couldn't do anywhere else in Dell. So basically, I built a transformed business focused online store, and it started making a lot of money, and from some of the things that I had built, and I had built business cases for. So I kind of had all the ideas related to what commerce could do for Dell in Japan. Keep in mind, this isn't all of Dell. And anyway, a couple of my projects went really, really well. And the CIO and VP of marketing, who are effectively the Dell CEO of Japan, walked over and asked me what job I wanted. And I said, well, how about chief architect? And so at 26, I was the chief architect of Dell Japan. And then 27, I was the chief architect for Dell Pan Asia. So for all 14 countries in Asia. So I was coming to Malaysia quite often, and Singapore, et cetera. And it was just they asked me what job I wanted because I had done a really successful project that was making them millions and millions of dollars in new revenue that they hadn't made before using technology. So architect, they gave me whatever title I wanted. That was when I realized I didn't know what architecture was. And I went back to the US to work for a guy named Steve Damon, who was a theoretical physicist. And he gave me, and he and I built a lot of the knowledge that I now use in practice. So over the next, after I went back home, I really learned how to be an architect. I learned the rigor, right? What are architecturally significant requirements and decisions, and how do they relate to, the process and agility and all of that kind of things. So it took me getting the title to realize that I hadn't earned the title. And then I went back to school, kind of thing. I didn't go back to school. I went and worked as an architect, kind of really getting all the skills I needed to be an architect over years. And that took me a few years to do on really big projects. So that was kind of my journey.
Right, thank you so much. An interesting journey, right? You learn Japanese so that you learn in Japan and then earn the title of job architect, and you didn't even know what is the job of architects. Okay,
No.
It's the similar kind of my background too. In my early days, my employer gave me the title of architects, but actually I didn't know. I wasn't prepared. I was not trained. I didn't have the knowledge, but I can just connect the dot and the thing like you are an architect, right? Until of course we discover more on the proper learning path to become architects and go through the certification. All right, it's interesting. So the rest of you, if you have any comment, please type in the Q&A box down there, and I will pick up the question accordingly. So let's move on into the question, the second one for King section, right? Perhaps to King section, what are your typical challenges faced by your organization, right, in establishing digital initiative? And how how enterprise architecture can help addressing the challenges, because now you carry the title of architects, and they know that digital and architects are interconnected, right? So what are your challenges at hand, and how do you overcome them?
Yes, Aaron. Thank you for the question, and fantastic response from Paul and his journey to become an architect. So Aaron, typically I started off with a cybersecurity unit, which I set up right from scratch. And now taking up the architecture role, I think I break my challenges into two. So there is the skill set acquisition, and how much time do I have to be able to acquire the necessary skills to be able to articulate the enterprise architecture value that I bring to the organization. And then on the other hand, there is the organization's acceptance of enterprise architecture. Now, the bank I work for typically started off working with IBM as a managed services provider. And so the IBM, during their time with the bank, sort of managed the enterprise architecture practice for the bank. Now, they did not do that. The approach they had was not holistic, but only centered around technology. So during the time that they did the engagement with the bank, they just managed the enterprise architecture as part of their managed services to make sure that technology was wholesome for the bank. Now, they exiting and now me taking the role, it presents enterprise architecture to be a bit more holistic, and it starts from the top and then goes down. Now, two major challenges, at the C level, there is an acceptance, we understand what we need and all that. And then the push for enterprise architecture actually now is that the bank has cost reduction. There's actually war against cost. And so one of the initiatives that we were able to agree on from an executive level is that I think that this is from the CEO himself, and he says that, listen guys, I know that enterprise architecture can help us to reduce cost and optimize, and also lessen the number of critical business applications that we do have. So today we come from a past where we had almost like a spaghetti IT architecture, if you look at it. But 3 or 4 years ago, we set out to sort of reduce the number of clutter we have. And this was also, you can pin it down to costs that were associated to some systems that had duplicated capabilities, systems that we're still paying licenses for that were not necessary and all that. So today, EA is accepted. How fast can EA deliver value to the organization? So we're currently just looking at quick wins, which are very simple things that we know we can do, whilst we even bring in the likes of maybe Paul or Aaron to come and help us do the necessary assessments to pinpoint where we are in our maturity and be able to move on. But from an executive level, it is that we need to achieve lower bottom line cost when it comes to cost of running IT and income. So we have some pegs there that we really want to achieve them, and we are using enterprise architecture to drive down those costs and lift up the efficiencies. And then now with the corona that happened just 2 years ago, how do we still remain competitive with the systems that we have and still continue to win the customer over? Because in my jurisdiction, the particular place that I live in Ghana, we have about 26 banks. Okay, and everybody's competing and everybody is innovating along the line. You go home and you sleep, the next morning the other bank has just come up with something. So it's a fiercely competitive market environment, and we are leveraging enterprise architecture to actually differentiate. We drive down cost and we want to differentiate. So that would be a bit of that from the organization side. Now, from the skill set. So I like what you said, Aaron, and which is on the getting the title. And then Paul was also saying that he got the title and then he realized he needed to beef up with knowledge. So now in my own personal learning development, and that which the organization also agrees to, is how fast can I become the likes of Paul and the likes of Aaron within a realistic time. And so I am personally on a serious development plan, and I think prior to the time I spoke to you, Aaron, I was just doing my PMP, and then I've also done my BTAB, and then I'm going on to do all the other, and I've done TOGAF as well. I just need to top up with some other certifications. Now, interestingly, what I see from the security certifications that I did, there are some of them have some similarities with some of the domains of architecture that I'm learning in. So hopefully I get over my personal challenges when it comes to implementing and supporting the organization with enterprise architecture, purely on the area of skill set development. And then from the organization's point, how do we get the necessary push? Because if we are going to get King alone and just about 4 guys, we can move this fast. But if we're going to get King alone and we're going to get some consulting and all that, how then we can move twice as fast to be able to give the organization some more value. So that would be what I would say on that. Thank you, Aaron.
Right, thank you so much, King Section. I think quite interesting, right? I mean, one of the motivation of the key stakeholders on the board meeting is that cost cutting, right? Because I think it's quite scary as typically I was engaged with the so-called enterprises. They got like running of hundreds of projects, right? And that hundred of projects at the end, I do not know what happened, right? You are just creating a bigger and bigger mess. And then, if you have architecture, that 100 maybe become 3. Right? Yeah. They just everything, they keep churning out the project, and without realizing that every project actually liability rather than a profit, right? It's a cost burden to the organization, and at the end is that you need to keep hiring more people and keep increasing the cost, and at the end, until one time that the CFO just fed up, right? And label IT as a cost center, and then call the CIO, and then cost scrubbing, cutting costs, and always IT people said, I'm not given money, I don't have budget. Yeah, just the way you do, right? You're spending money. Who's going to give you money? But if you do investment and the money is coming to you, they keep asking, King Section, I have 10 million this year. Can you help me to spend? Because they know that the 10 million will generate 100 million, right?
Exactly.
Right? Otherwise, that if you don't have architecture, that 10 million become 1 cent. Right?
Of course.
After that, the server keep coming, and then you need to hire, rent a bigger data center, and etc. No value. The business said 3 years ago, I've been asking these features, until today you still haven't delivered. Now you're asking another 20 million, right? You go and play kite. Okay, so this irony about our world today, and still happening everywhere, right? The knowing of this sarcastic comment, right? But it's happening everywhere. That's why I think it's the reason that why we established EA chapters. We want to educate people. Come on, guys, wake up, right? This is the reality, right? Do you want to be part of the winning team or you are the loser team? Right? Those who are in the winning team, they're trying to change, to transform. Those on the loser team, never mind, not my job. Okay, we move on to the next employment. Okay, so I guess we can debate and argue on this type of perspective because I come across many of the people in this situation. All right, now over to you, Paul. I know Paul has been waiting to speak again. Right, I think you have taken your coffee already, breakfast. Right. Okay, so Paul, in your day-to-day job, you've been traveling between US and Europe, right? What is your observation in the typical challenges faced by most architects, right? What are they struggling? Okay, yeah, and also in the connection is that how they can create value in their work, right? I think you have shared a bit in your presentation, but I just want to know now, is there any compare and contrast the architects in Europe and the architects in the US, right? You deal with all the large organization, large governmental body, and large enterprises, right? Fortune top 10 or top 100 in the world, right? What are the typical challenges? Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, I get asked this quite a bit. What are the differences in different places? Generally, what I find is that different places have slightly different challenges, primarily because of the access that they have to difficult problems or large problems. So, for example, you know, if you have a population of architects that have not had the sort of global bank problem spaces, then they tend to not be able to see, you know, innovation and the big picture. You know, the big problems for the big companies out there. Getting access to those and seeing how people deal with them, I think, is one of the things that makes you more and more friendly and more getting a better view of architecture. That's why things like the SES chapter are so important, because getting the view of a complex, you know, architectural challenge is part of what it takes to be able to someday grow into, you know, an architect that can meet that challenge. So what that means is I see a lot. So I think that Europe seems to be more, it seems to be a riper, you know, kind of a more mature baseline of architects in a way. The European systems and the closeness of the countries, so Germany and France and Italy and, you know, and Great Britain and all of that, you know, with Brexit and with the war in the Ukraine, you know, architects have to deal with a lot of these really big challenges that don't really show up until you become a global business in the US, right? So until you become an Amazon or an Apple or something, right, or Starbucks, you're not really, you know, doing business in Texas versus doing business in New York is really not that different from a financial, you know, leadership perspective. So I think that some of the challenges that we see really show up in the really big businesses. Now, that being said, the most common problem I see with architects and architecture teams is exactly what you said. One, the value question, right? That too few architects speak value, in my opinion. Right? They've never been asked to. They've been in the back, you know, they came up like King and I and you did, right, through technology circles. They were all about technology and they were all about delivery, not even just innovative technology, but delivery, right? So get it done and get it done as cheap and as fast as possible. Now we're asking a fundamentally different question of these people, which is, don't get it done as cheap and fast as possible. Get it done in a way that makes the most money for us, right? Sometimes that's about saving money, but sometimes that's about going all in on and understanding the impact of this technology on our customers, operations, our, you know, finance, things like that. So, you know, I used to joke that you know you're dealing with an architect when they can tell you the difference between CapEx and OpEx, right? And so, as opposed to whether they can tell you the difference between microservice and monolith. So again, that challenge of value. The other one I find just to be stupid. It's a sad world, but the truth is most architect teams don't want to do it the way they want to do it their way, right? So architecture itself is a little different at every company. And that is silly. It's like, again, it's like if I had a guy who went from Amazon to a bank. And he went to the bank as a lead architect, and he'd never heard of the words business capabilities. Right now, if you know banks are heavily invested in using business capabilities as architects and understanding objectives and all that. But he was at Amazon, right? And he was basically a glorified engineer. So again, that's the challenge that I see, is that we keep doing it differently. We keep reinventing architecture over and over again. And we spend more time talking about what is architecture than going out and doing stuff, right? Go fix the business. Don't talk about architecture, go create value. Then you don't have to justify it. So again, I see a lot of that really commonly across even the most advanced practices. I mean, I watched one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies basically just scrap 5 years of architecture work, fire a bunch of people because the CIO didn't like the word architecture. So it's a very the real challenge is that it's a variable. It's based on opinion, right? It would be like if your management has a good opinion, then you get to do stuff. But I always say, I always liken this to basically if a CEO of a hospital walked around and bumped into a janitor and they got to talking and he went, oh, I really like you. You're amazing. I'm going to make you the head of surgery. Right? You just like people laugh, but that's how I got the title, right? Like somebody went, you know what? I'm going to make you an architect. And so this kind of background gives us a lot of problems. Because again, if we were just educated in the way King's doing and learning, the pieces at, what is out there and how do I learn it, as opposed to let me invent it here. And oh, by the way, the other big problem that we need to address is the vendor problem. And that is vendors have a lot of marketing money that gets spent on creating hype. And a hype creates confusion and the feeling of a need to invest. And then each of the vendors competes on using different terms for the same thing, right? So you've got you got lots of clouds out there, but the two big ones, Amazon, the biggest ones, Amazon and Microsoft, right? They both have architects who do nothing similar, right? They're just not the same. They both have a well-architected framework. They both have a cloud architecture framework. It's like we have these just competing definitions for everything from every vendor. EY, Capgem, Infosys, Wipro, all of them have a slightly different version of what their architects are going to be, and that creates a huge confusion in the marketplace. If you're a client working on a big project, you may work with 4 different types of architects from different vendors that will be nothing alike. They will have nothing in common. So I think that's the big problem, is that we internalize the definitions of architecture in practice.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. And it reminded me of someone that, when I spoke about the architect, right? This person suddenly got allergic, right? Allergic means as such that, oh, what do you mean architecture never work? And it has never been work and it will never work. I said, what do you mean, right? It's never been a practice. I said, how about this company they're doing that? So this person actually got trauma. It could be, that bad experience that in the past that he dealt with the architect and let him down, right? Yeah. Then he labeled the entire architects, the IT professional that carrying the title of architect like myself. He go and squeeze and put me in the corner and, tell me that it doesn't work and etc. Bang the table. Wow, that's interesting, right? That's still happening though, right? It's pity got such a person today, maybe also because of our fault, right? In the past that someone carrying the title of architect bring him down. Right? Maybe he almost lost the job and etc. Then now suddenly said it never worked, right? So of course the other way around, if we ask the question is that what happened if you build a large system without the architecture, right? It's just impossible. Okay, so I think we can debate all this until the cow go home. So it's like a hot topic. All right, I think let's do. Let me just pick up a couple of questions. I think we have about a few questions already. One typing in the chat, one typing in the Q&A. Okay, so they got the first question is, there are many EA tools in the market. How do organizations select the right tool to start the digital EA? Okay, I think we are not in the platform to discuss about commercial terms, right? So if you want to get a fair opinion, you can ping me directly through my email at SES. Okay, erentan@ses.org.sg. I can give you a fair perspective about 6 tools available in the market because I got the hands-on experience. But I wouldn't be sharing that topics in this forum. Right? So I can just say answer live, right? The person you can contact me directly. Okay, the next one is hi Paul. Okay, this is for Paul. Great presentation. Looking at the slide on engagement model, what advice would you have for architects who want to try to adopt BTABoK and have ongoing project or program that cut across this area? Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, great question. In fact, we're designing a set of what we call scenarios, which just are effectively how do you adopt these tools. Now, the good thing about the BTABoK is, I mean, everything there is identifiable, right? So architectural decisions, for example. So you can just click on that one article and use that article to do better decisions, right? So the cool thing about the BTABoK is that you don't have to adopt the BTABoK at a universal level, so to speak. It's a very practical tool set. So for example, if you want to make better architectural decisions, you go read the article, download the decision record, and you're going to need to use 3 to 4 tools in your project to make that work. One, you'll need to create architecturally significant requirements. So you need to understand which requirements are significant to your architecture structurally and value based. 2, you'll need to look at decision records and how you use architectural decision records to make those decisions. 3, you'll need to start using views and viewpoints like the context view to help bring those decisions together. So again, you can very much adopt the BTABoK on a project tomorrow. We actually have a number of people a number of large companies doing this, individuals doing this. The other thing, of course, is you can then get your team together and start looking at, do we want to do these more on all of our projects? Things like Aaron was talking about investment. So, you know, how do we understand what the business cases are for the projects we're working on? Where's the value being created? You know, those kinds of techniques. But again, normally people are adopting the concepts, then the structured canvas approach, and then also switching over to the competencies that you have, like an assessment of yourself against the BTABoK competencies, and then using 1 or 2 things at a time to get started.
Right, thank you so much. So the next question, I think, from Stephen. I'm an electrical engineer, so I believe he grew up as an electrical engineer, get an engineering degree, etc. Right now, you want to switch to become the architects. Then of course he is faced with the 2 issue here. The first one, people ask, why can you share your experience on a software developer background? Okay, basically I think you have some limitation in here. Okay, and then the second one is architecture is more relevant to large organization, but how does someone trying to break into the industry get experience? Volunteers, a big NGO, non-governmental organization, non-profit organization. Right, I think maybe I think Paul, you have experience in this and you have the degree in Japanese. Have everyone ever asked you, where's your degree in the software engineering 101? Or whatever, right? Your degree is 0, basically you only learn the Japanese kanji.
Yeah, you know, we only get it's only during the interview that they or what, based on the job description. Becoming an architect is actually now a pretty well understood thing. We have it wasn't when we started. When we started, there was really nothing. It was just, you know, give yourself the title and get somebody to hire you. Like, and once you've been hired as an architect, then you're an architect. The truth is today, the electrical, I mean, if you come from an electrical engineering background or an engineering background, we did a lot of studies on the professional engineering exams for the PE for a number of the different types of engineers, right? Mechanical, electrical. The cool thing about this is it's now basically the same. What you need to look at is effectively a training class is a way to start, right? So, and I always say do ISA first and then do TOGAF. If you want, TOGAF is fine. It's it's a good framework. It gets a lot more press than it gets used. Like it gets a lot more attention than it gets used in the real world. The real world, people download TOGAF, they look at it, they kind of go, okay, yeah, we'll call it, we'll say we're doing TOGAF. And they use like one thing in it. With being an architect means you need to practice a few critical skills. You need to practice business technology strategy skills, design skills, and quality attribute skills, what we call systems thinking, right? Quality attribute skills are structural, which will speak to your engineering heart. The best thing is to take an ISA foundation class with Aaron or something there in ATD in Singapore. It will set the stage for what your practice should look like and what you need to get good at. We say that there's about 16 primary things that you need to practice to be an architect, and some of those are harder than others. Like you still have to be able to understand technology. You've got to understand investment. You've got to understand value, stakeholders, design, quality attributes, etc. And it'll take you a couple of years to really practicing those on projects, and you'll be able to call yourself an architect.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. Okay, now I have a question for King section. It is from Nicholas Ong. Hi, I am new to this concept of enterprise architecture. I am from a vendor background, managing Wi-Fi or network solution for customers. I believe you can connect to your past job, right? Just now, King section. How will the skill of architects able to help me in my dealing with customers?
That's an interesting question. Now, I think like the conversation has been going with regards to the skill set that maybe you bring to the path that you want to start with the architecture. I like the ITAB Foundations document, the screen that Paul shared when it comes to the strategy, mapping strategy to business model canvas, going down to customer journeys and so on and so forth. Now, with what the gentleman is asking from a services point of view, you should be able to understand using architecture. You should be able to now simplify which kind of services that you are trying to give to your customers. So, with regards to being what you call a Wi-Fi support person, and it would have been good to know if he wants to be an architect or he's just trying to serve his customers well. But in the domain of architecture, you would be able to sort of seemingly break down what kind of customers do you serve? Do you know the customers that you serve? And what kind of service are you offering them? And what are the methods to afford, or what are the methods to provide them those services in a way that you can continue to be competitive to them? Or even to the bare bone services that you offer, how effective can you be able to give those services to your customers? And like we said, in the architecture toolbox, there will be definitely something that we can find. If it's customer journeys we are looking at, if it's simplification of the systems that you're using or processes that you're using to be able to deliver the services to the customers. Now, maybe my question to him will be, for a Wi-Fi technician or a Wi-Fi system support person, are you doing the service yourself or are you employed by an organization? Now, if you're doing the services yourself, how do customers reach you? So is it the case that you are advertising in many options like social media? Do you have a website? How are you collecting? How are customers contacting you? So there are, if you ask me, from the experience that I've had, where in my days, customers will just have to pick a phone and call you, and based on consistent good services, I get referenced and then I call. But in this day and age now, you can even have a basic website that can be able to help customers interact with you and be able to do some response 24/7, because today services don't sleep. People sleep, but services don't sleep. So I think the conversation is a bit wider. We may not be able to exhaust it here, but from a Wi-Fi point of view, I think from a services point of view, I think the focus is on how are you interfacing with your customers, what services are you giving, and even in the services that you're giving. Enterprise architecture through process reviews and process optimization that you can, these are skill sets and there are tools that can guide you to be able to be effective and do more with less, you understand? So those are some of the things I would say, but definitely if we had more time, we could break it down more and more and more. I know you, Aaron, or Paul may want to add a thing or two.
Yeah, thank you so much, King Saxon. I think I just want to add something, it's like always the saying that, if you are from the vendor base, you don't have the architecture knowledge or it's not trained, it's not equipped, right? You guarantee you will speak technical, think technical, speak technical, write technical. At the end of the day, the customer said, can you give me discount? Right? You only talking technical, the other guy is not talking technical, right? What's the difference? I should buy from you and buy the other one. The other guy give me 40% discount. Can you give me 42% discount? Right? But if you don't understand the architecture, you talk about value. Right? Your value is far beyond the other guy, the other competitor, right? You're talking business value, right? You're talking about profitability, right? You buy this product, it will generate values, cost saving, and helping the business, etc. Right? At the end, they said, "Wow, your product is so cheap," right? Talking about the value, people, it's perceived value, right? Why would you buy the expensive thing? Because it's perceived value. So you need to be able to communicate that. You need to be able to articulate, right? So like it's the saying is that you still can work in the vendor, right? Think technical, but speak and write business. Okay, so that will be, I think, the advice. Let's move on to the couple of questions. I think, let me just back to the King section, right? Because as I mentioned that we seldom hear any development of the digital transformation or enterprise architecture in Africa. Okay, so now perhaps you could give us the landscape, right? What is the trend, the culture of digital transformation in Africa, right? And what do you think organization could do more? Right? Because I think you are the fact that I believe you are ahead, a little bit ahead, or at the most of the organization or most of the professional out there, right? You're very forward-looking, and you can dialogue with us, and I feel comfortable as well. You got the knowledge, right? So, what do you think organization or the industry could do more to sustain or to boost the sustainability of the digital transformation?
Aaron, I think that's a good one, and one, I think. Organizations are actually waking up to the digital transformation, and typically because whilst it was a long conversation in the boardroom, COVID came to catalyze that and sort of made it necessary, because suddenly whatever project you had and you made it 3 years or 4 years before COVID, you had to do it in 6 months or 3 months, because everything needed to be accessed remotely and services need to get into the point where it's at the doorstep, the digital doorstep of the customer. So for most organizations now, and especially in the financial industry, there is a boom to mobile apps for banking. And if you've studied the terrain for a while, Africa leapfrog with the mobile payment systems. And so you have the likes of M-Pesa from Kenya, and you have MTN, which is the largest mobile telco in Africa, also continue to become present in other African markets with regards to the mobile payment systems, which is the MTN mobile money. Now, when it comes to the financial system and the banks and non-financial institutions, now enterprise architecture has been noticed. I can say that because in most publications in the newspapers and technology magazines, you find out that there's the architectural word is coming up, and people are understanding that. And I belong to CISOs and CIO forums, and everybody from time to time you see everybody posting that, hey, we need an architect, we need an architect. So the talent pool is at its infancy, and when it comes to regulations, the regulator started off with drumming down the cybersecurity compliance and the framework, in which they were asking all banks to make sure we are ISO certified and PCI DSS certified, and so on and so forth. And that drove the skill set development and even the talent pool expansion for CISOs. Now, CISOs have more or less settled in for the past 3.5 years. You're seeing that most financial institutions, even to become, to pass that regulation, you needed to have a CISO. So now CISOs are in. the new wave is the architecture, which is now what organizations in Africa are looking at. And everybody is beginning to ask, who is that person that can help to keep technology honest? and that's where it starts. And because you're finding a situation where business will never stop asking and never stop moving when it comes to their demands and trying to reach whatever business objectives. But again, technology can move this fast. And so in situations where they find out that technology is moving too slow, who else can tell me whether these guys are telling me the truth or they're just tactically slowing me down? So now architecture in the boardroom is starting, and you find out that global players like IBM, Oracle, and all that are also doing a bit more of their awareness when it comes to the architecture. And then you have the big three when it comes to the auditing firms also, showing forth a few capabilities and what they can do in the architecture space. A few people that knocked at the door is the Ernst & Young, and then you have that of Deloitte as well. Now, that in itself has created the awareness. Now, if you're looking at what we can do more, I think there's a sort of drive for certification now, and people are hungry for the knowledge. When I stepped into the PPP class, I was surprised to have 40 people in class, and they told me that that cohort has been running since the beginning of 2020. So a lot of people are realizing that architecture is required. A lot of people are looking at how to expand their knowledge to embrace the opportunities as they spring up. Unfortunately, in my part of the world, uptake is quite slow, but give and take is within 5 years. So you see when a new regulation is pushed, within 5 years, everybody adjusts and everybody aligns. So Africa is the new area to look at if you're trying to attain the status of being an enterprise architect. Now, picking from that same talent pool means that the story I gave for myself, you find out most people having similar stories where they've been in different facets of IT, they've done different facets of the tech, the domains, maybe software development, networking, and then eventually they sort of emerge into the role of an architect, and then they start building the necessary business language capabilities to be able to hold it in between. But I would say in all that with regards to Africa, we are in the formative stages when it comes to enterprise architecture. And like you said, for the bank I work for, we are a bit forward looking. We always lead the industry when it comes to technology. And that's how come you find out that we have an architect, and we and another bank that I know are looking at actually have architects. Now the other ones are still thinking through and seeing how best we can expand the architecture space.
Right, thank you. Okay, we still have, but we will wrap up very soon. But I still can take 1 or 2 more questions. So those of you who have a burning question, please type in the Q&A or in the chat. I will pick it up. Okay, so in the meantime, over to you, Paul. You have been waiting anxiously. No, you're ready always to speak, right? Perhaps what is your advice, okay, for someone who wants to become an architect as a career, right, as a professional career? Since the demand of architects, I think, is at the exponential rate every day, right? Anywhere in the world, basically, if you are carrying the title of architect, you get yourself proven in delivering value. I think you can move to any country, like visa or passport universal, right? You can go to any country remote, right? So perhaps someone who wants to specialize in the business architecture, information architecture, software architecture, infrastructure architecture, and solution architecture, right? And what aspirant path they should go through? Any training and certification recommendation, right? Especially now, of course, how do we master BTABoK in the shortest possible way?
Well, the problem with architecture is that book learning takes you so far, and then you have to have experience, right? So really, what you want to find is an organization that is committed to giving you those experiences across the. So I always say the fastest way to do it is take 4, almost any 4 competencies from the 5 pillars, like 4 from each or 3 from each even, and find a place that you can practice those, right? Because that's or some project or product that you can practice them on. Be able to show each, those competencies and how you're developing them. that kind of holistic approach is the way that most of the architects I see do it the fastest, right? Now, the problem, of course, is how do you get that first job? If you don't have the title and you want to work as an architect, you want to find a company that isn't, you don't just want to find any company that will hire you, because being an architect at a bank and being an architect at Amazon and being an architect at another company is a completely different experience. What you want to look at is how committed they are to helping you build those competencies and practice those skills, right? Because if they're going to put you in a cubicle to make diagrams of things for the next 3 years, you're never going to develop your competencies, right? You got to be stakeholders and practice and work human dynamics. You've got to work on business sides of the equation. So you can't just be trapped in IT or in the background of IT, right? So that's what I generally look for. Now, again, we're in an environment where you can get, like you said, if you can spell the word architecture, there's jobs out there. They may not be the ones that you want, but the number one way today to get it is get the right training, but then most importantly, start gathering that experience so that when you post for an architect job, you can say, I've developed a business case. I've done a investment strategy using solid road mapping. I've done a detailed architectural design of a major product. You know, those kinds of, you know, I've looked at security. I've managed quality attributes like performance and reliability and things like that. So what people are looking for on those job interviews aren't just the experience of having had the job. They're looking for, have you developed the competencies they need to do the job? But again, you've got to find a company that also likes the word architecture, that uses it, that wants to, you know, that's doing business architecture work, that also has that work connected to other kinds of architecture work. So especially if you come from a technical background, then that's where your challenge lies. And you do need to be pretty flexible about who you're going to work for, and possibly where, because, you know, it is a hands-on sport. Like, you have to be in the thick of it with a company for a while. So yeah, so that's the one thing that I would like to fix the most, is that entry point. When do we, you know, how can I get my first job as an architect, preferably while I'm younger, or if I'm switching careers and I know what that is. We hope that a group of companies will join us in effectively offering a career path for architects, for people like you.
Right, thank you so much. I think we have perhaps one last question, right? Can EA architects work from home or offshore? My answer is absolutely yes. Okay, because as a we do a lot of the consulting services now. We do everything online. Okay, so you don't need to be physically face to face. Of course, you lose the human touch, but I mean, it is possible. But of course, if you can do face to face, it's better, right? Because we are human. We are a social person. We are not the individual person that living in the server room and talk to the you know, handphone, TCP/IP, etc. Right? We're talking with human. So the answer is yes, possible. Okay, so we are almost an end to our session this afternoon. Perhaps I would just want to get King Saxon or Preiss to you know, leave last thought, right? Message for the audience. You know, while we are still doing online, I think hopefully next year or maybe towards end of the year we can do physical, right? Every country now is opening up, and I heard that Indonesia just opened today, announced, right? So exciting. More and more countries opening up, and yep. Perhaps over to you. Maybe Paul, you are ready. Your last message.
You know, I can always talk about architecture. Yeah, again, my number one thing is it doesn't matter who you work for. It matters the type of work you do, and it matters the word rigor. The word rigor means to do something very, very well and fully and completely. So look at the competencies, look at the articles, and go do that thing and find out what the best version of one of those is. And just do that every week. That's the same way you learn to program, or the same way you learn a language. You know, it's like learning a language. And you simply go in and try these things. Try out a roadmap, try out a context view, try out an architectural decision record. Just focus on that. And in a year, you'll speak architect. And when you start speaking architect, people notice.
Right. Thank you so much for the wisdom or advice. Okay. All right, King Saxon, over to you to wrap it up.
Yes, I think for me, in the journey and the stack that Paul showed, the people management skills is very critical. And I've seen that you could be technically the best. You could be anything that you want when it comes to technology, and especially if you emerged from the backgrounds that we've just spoken about, from a typical hands-on engineering background. For you to be successful and be able to move and show that level of value, you need to also come handy with your understanding of the people management skills, because it's critical. And especially when you meet executives who do not have the patience and you are not able to manage them, by the time you realize whatever they've asked you to do, somebody else is doing it. So just make sure that your people management skills, the emotional intelligence of how to deal with executives and so on and so forth, also comes to play to complement whatever value that you have under the hood to be able to show to them. So that's what I would say to anybody that has the interest and is also looking at developing a career in enterprise architecture. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, King Saxon. Okay, we are almost, not almost, we are come to the end of our session. Yeah, right. We wish we can continue until, and I think we got one last question for Paul to give you a quick answer from Stephen. I think you can read the question about how to build a personal EA portfolio will be a good blog for LinkedIn. Okay, over to you, Paul.
Personal EA portfolio would be a good blog. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I will start. I'm starting to do one of those. So follow my newsletter on Business to Technologists, and you will probably see an article just like that.
All right, thank you so much, and hope you have found this session fruitful.